Okay, so here we are. Third passing on some Bhagavad-gitas. So everybody's on cue on page. Let me wait to get everybody set up a bit, drink a little water, and then we'll start to recite. You all are getting ready to witness the end of the Bhagavad-gita. And then we'll have to start all over again. At verse 1, Kurukshetre, Dharmakshetre. Okay, looks like everybody's kind of looking at something at this point. Tameva sharanam gaccha. Tameva sharanam gaccha. Sarva bhavena bharata. Sarva bhavena bharata. Tat prasadat param shantim.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Tam eva sharanam gaccha.
Tam eva sharanam gaccha.
Sarva bhavena bharata.
Sarva bhavena bharata.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Tam eva sharanam gaccha.
Tam eva sharanam gaccha.
Sarva bhavena bharata.
Sarva bhavena bharata.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Tat prasadat param shantim.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
Sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam.
O son of Bharat, surrender to him utterly. By his grace, you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. So I say, and you will please repeat. O shine of Bharat,
O sign of Bharat,
surrender to him utterly.
surrender unto him utterly.
By his grace,
By his grace,
you will attain transcendental peace
you will attain transcendental peace
and the supreme eternal abode.
and the supreme and eternal abode.
Okay, so here's the purport. A living entity should therefore surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in everyone's heart, and that will relieve him from all kinds of miseries of this material existence. By such surrender, not only will one be released from all the miseries of this life, but at the end he will reach the Supreme God. The transcendental world is described in Vedic literature, Rig Veda 1.22.20, as Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. Since all of creation is the kingdom of God, everything material is actually spiritual, but Paramam Padam specifically refers to the eternal abode, which is called the spiritual sky or Vaikuntha. In the 15th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, it is stated, Sarvasya chaham hridaysanivishtaha. The Lord is seated in everyone's heart. So this recommendation that one should surrender unto the super soul sitting within means that one should surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna has already been accepted by Arjuna as the Supreme. He was accepted in the 10th chapter as Param Brahma Param Tam. Arjuna has accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the supreme abode of all living entities. Not only because of personal experiences, but Also because of the evidence of great authorities like Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyas. Tat eva sharanam gaccha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shanti sthanam prapsyasi shashvatam. O son of Bharat, surrender unto him utterly. By his grace you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. This is the end of a section here, actually. This is verse 62. So, back in the 40s, (1840, 1841, 1842, 18... in this chapter, in the 18th chapter, we were hearing about how one should follow their particular pattern of life in the Varnashram system. And then, after that, Krishna spoke what he calls confidential knowledge. And then by speaking confidential knowledge, he explained how one could rise to a platform where one is very equipoised, sees everyone in the same kind of light. A person is not bewildered. A person is not running after the items of the material world. And eventually he begins talking about how one comes to knock on the door of the kingdom of God. And then in this particular section, from about 50 to 62, toward the end of that, we hear what happens if you just aren't into that. Lord knows there's a few people out there that aren't. So what happens if you're just, that doesn't seem to get it for you? Well, Krishna describes that to Arjuna, that if you do not follow this path, then you will have to act all the same. But what will that action do? That action will entangle you. So it works like that, that the Supreme, he has, I call it the vending machine theory. You know, like you go to a pop machine and you put in your, I think nowadays it's like $1.50 or $2 or something like that, or worse. You put your bill in there and then it goes shukum pakump, and you press a button and something whirls around and the bottle comes out, and you don't open it for a few minutes because it's just fallen 3 feet, so you know that it'll squirt all over you if you do. But it's the vending machine system. If you don't put the money in, you're not going to get anything out. If you do put the money in, you know, you can't, there's only certain things you can get. You can get a Pepsi or what are the usual flavors these days? Pepsis and Mountain Dews and Coca-Cola and things like that. And it comes falling out for you. So you wouldn't be able to buy a loaf of bread from that machine. Gerbils wouldn't come out of it. Something else wouldn't come out of it. Only certain kinds of things come out of it. So it's the same kind of thing. In the material world, the Supreme Lord sets up the system. We don't. He sets it up. And depending on what we do is what comes out. If we're going to ignore the system, we get one kind of reaction. If we're going to pay attention to the system, we get a different kind of reaction. So that's basically all there is. And as we see, Krishna is not at all pushy in this Bhagavad-gita. He tells Arjuna what he thinks. Arjuna has asked him, and before Arjuna asked Krishna, Krishna wasn't saying much. So back there in the second chapter of this Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna had a kind of a crisis, and he said, my dear Lord, I'm not going to fight, but please instruct me. So he was actually asking for Krishna's advice. And he was asking in a serious mood, not a jovial mood, that he was prepared to take whatever Krishna said very seriously. So then Krishna actually started to give him real advice. And in these, between the second chapter here and now we're in the 18th chapter, the Bhagavad-gita is pretty much wrapped up at this point. And Krishna has told him that follow your duty, that you must rise in the modes of nature, that as a result of doing your duty, you won't become entangled. But if you fail to do your duty, you will become entangled. So the way that the material world works is that we can either ignore the plan of spiritual life, or we can try to understand and gradually drag ourselves into conformity with a spiritual path. No one's going to force us. That's not the way the world works. But we'd certainly do a lot better if we try to make the attempt. Because if we don't, what will happen? The tendrils and tentacles of the material world will gradually drag us deeper and deeper into strange kinds of karma that are very difficult to dig ourselves out of. So the material world is designed to kind of pull us under, to tangle us up. We hear these words all the time, being entangled by material nature. What does that really mean? Well, it means a couple of things. There are modes of nature, and we've talked about them. There's the mode of goodness, mode of passion, the mode of ignorance. In the mode of passion, things are very turbulent. So in the mode of passion, it's hard to make good decisions. It's like being in an aircraft in a very difficult storm. We're being blown around all over the place, and we're moving fast on top of it. And if we happen to do something at the wrong time, exactly a certain way, we can be smashed into bits. So that's the way the material world works, in the mode of passion. In the mode of ignorance, we've already been smashed to bits. So we're just lying on the ground waiting for the ambulance to arrive. And so that's what the mode of ignorance is like. And the mode of goodness is we've climbed out of the airplane, we've tried to slow the engines down, and we're trying to see what's actually going on in the world. So, unfortunately, there isn't a plan C. There's just two plans. One of them is try to engage yourself gradually in spiritual life, or the other plan is forget all about it. And, no one's going to come after you, at least right away. And as you get out of further and further out of the protection of the agency of the Supreme Lord, we find the world looks darker and stranger and colder and lonelier and more turbulent. So those who are a little bit attentive will see this as my cue to try to follow this process of spiritual life. And spiritual life isn't all that bad. Of course, it's true that spiritual happiness is like poison in the beginning and nectar at the end. We read that at the very beginning of this chapter. It appears to be like poison in the beginning, but it's nectar at the end. Whereas happiness and passion feels like nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. It's the other way around. So, yes, there is some difficulty in bringing ourselves into alignment with spiritual life. But everybody comes out better on the long run by trying to align their consciousness with spiritual life. And if we don't, as we say, the option is to become further entangled. And there really isn't a plan C. Of course, most of us create a plan C by kind of flipping back and forth between these two options. You know, we kind of are sold on the idea that we should engage in spiritual life, but we kind of fall off the wagon and go back and forth between the two. But eventually, plan A will win out if we stay with the whole situation. And through spiritual action, through trying to follow a spiritual process, we will become, as these previous verses have described, you know, there's these one who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes Supreme Brahman, becomes joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He's equally disposed. Toward every living entity in that state, he attains pure devotion to me, pure devotional service to me. Being purified by his intelligence, controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification. Being freed from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place, who eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who is always in trance, who is detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things. Freed from all false proprietorship and peaceful, such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. So these are some of the qualities we see in those that are actually making the progress of spiritual awakening. And then Krishna if you do not act according to my direction, do not fight, then you will be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. So he's telling Arjuna, because he's a warrior, that he can either try to understand what Krishna is asking him to do, how to engage in this battle. Or if he just declines to fight, there'll be some other thing that'll come up which will drag him into some other kind of conflict anyway. So it's not that he's going to begin to live a completely different life. One way, he can use the nature that he has accepted in a positive way. And the other way, it will still come out, but it will happen without any real benefit. So then it says, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of material energy. That's where I get my soda pop machine example there. So it's not exactly like a soda pop machine, but you get the idea. It's a machine. The material nature is a machine, and our bodies are like machines. We are driving them around, and one day we have to get out of them, and like all machines, they break down after some time. But Krishna is making the way the machine works, and we can accept it or we can ignore it. And again, at the very end of Bhagavad-gita, at the end of this chapter, Krishna will say to Arjuna, now I've explained to you this transcendental spiritual knowledge. Do how you like. Do whatever you want to do. So he's not saying, okay, now you must do this or you're a total idiot. He doesn't say it like that. He says, my dear Arjuna, do whatever you like to do. So at no point does Krishna force the issue. He knows for love to be real, for our heart to change, we have to do that change. There's nothing he can do because he has given us that free will. So if he forced it, he would be taking away the free will that makes love valuable. So therefore, he's allowing everyone to come to their decision on their own terms, on their own time. But as I always say, the sooner the better. The sooner the better. Because you don't gain anything from knocking around in this strange torture chamber that we call planet Earth. It's just a wild ride in some kind of Halloween theme park or something like that. It's all kinds of weird things going on, and oftentimes we find ourselves in difficulty. But we can work our way out of here, which is what is actually the mentality of someone who finally wakes up. All right, so I'm going to say that much, and then I'm going to start talking about conceptions of God, which is what this verse is actually about. But let me see if anyone has any questions about that. These two different paths and this whole kind of wrapping up, summing up of the Bhagavad-gita that's happening at this stage. Yes, really.
We hear it's in this verse, this word surrender a lot.
Right.
So perhaps you could give us some more and practical understanding of what that means for us, in our attempt to walk the proper path.
Yeah. It's a kind of an interesting word. And the word in Sanskrit is Sharanagati, I believe. And surrender has a lot of negative connotations in the English language. Generally, surrender is what you do when you haven't got any options and you just wait to get kicked in the face, which isn't maybe the most, sort of attractive of all options. But that's not exactly what's meant by the concept of surrender. There are listed symptoms of surrender, which involve, understanding one's to be meek and humble, always doing everything favorable to devotional service and never doing anything unfavorable, etc., etc. So we see that I don't want to class it as a misnomer, actually, but it's certainly easy to get the wrong idea of what we mean by surrender. At least if you happen to be an English speaker. I don't know how they term it in Russian, but or in some other language, that is on the earth. But surrender, I think they could have done with a different word, but it's there, and in some ways, it has good connotations even in English as well. But the idea is to recognize that our God project is over, basically. We all come to the material world with this plan that we are going to become our own version of God. And we're going to figure out exactly what it takes to put it together here in the Earth planet. We're going to prove to everybody that actually we are God and they are not. And we're going to show them how it's done. And we try and we go lifetime after lifetime, and somehow or other it just never works. And we never cotton on to the idea that everybody's doing the same thing that we are, that everybody else has also got their own God project. And so we're in competition with other gods, and so nobody ever wins. And we never get that satisfaction that everybody says, all right, you really are the tops of everything. Even if we get it, it's only for a short bit of time. And then we discover that we're not really happy. So once we give up that project, and generally speaking, usually we have to get kicked around enough to actually recognize the futility of that project. And then we have to actually get some mercy from the Supreme to recognize that that project doesn't work now, and it's not that we just did it wrong or we got some bad breaks. It's that project never works. It just looks like it's going to work. It's on all the billboards everywhere. And you can try it now, and you can go on doing it for thousands of lifetimes, and it will never get any closer to working. So surrender, in one sense, is giving up that project and saying, okay, so now, Krishna, I'm going to try to engage in spiritual life. But then this deep-seated fear comes bubbling up from way, way lower in our consciousness, saying, you are going to become what? You're going to become a devotee? Ha 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 ha. You know how addicted you are. I know how addicted you are. And you're going to claim you're going to be a devotee. We'll see how long that one lasts. But, if you just stay with it, eventually, strangely enough, it starts to work. So this is the idea of surrender. We're surrendering this this bad idea that we've been sold on somewhere down the line, and this idea that we've been carrying from one lifetime to another lifetime to another lifetime that never worked. And that's how I would describe the concept of surrender. And we get back into the same basic concept that there are two paths, and you can take your choice. The option is open. Nobody's going to force you at gunpoint. You can do whichever one you want. But if you're a little bit aware and you watch what happens next, you'll begin to see what starts to happen as you choose one path or the other. You begin to see what the immediate repercussions are. Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Why Krishna in this verse says surrender unto him and not surrender unto
Right.
me?
That's an interesting point. And this gets back to something I was talking about early last week on Monday. Sometimes Krishna does things in an indirect way. Here he's talking about himself in third person, which seems strange. Of course, this is the month of Damodar, and we're observing the Damodar Astakam, and Govardhan Hill Festival, which is going to happen in 2 days. And there'll be a big mountain of sweets, But the whole festival commemorates when Indra tried to kill everybody by, washing them away with water in Vrindavan. And the reason Indra was so angry was that Krishna talked all the cowherd men out of doing an Indra yagya. And why did Krishna give the reason for them not to do the yagya? Krishna used atheist philosophy. So here's this is the one you'll never read in the Bible. That God uses atheist philosophy to talk his parents and all the elders of the community out of engaging in a sacrifice. So again, sounds really strange. What's up with this guy? Why does he do stuff like this? Well, part of it is when you start to understand the mysteries of rasa and lila, that he doesn't want to say, hey, I'm God. He doesn't want to play that game. In fact, that's what the whole idea of lila is all about. He wants to downplay his role as God. So if he tells the cowherd men, why are you worshiping Indra? Just worship me. It'll pull them out of the rasa that they're in. He doesn't want to do that. And I think something similar is going on here with Arjuna, that if he says, just surrender unto me, it starts to change the mood. We know that as far as our acharyas have told us, that the rasa of awe and veneration and the rasa of intimate affection, they don't work together. They're rasa vasa. You can have one or you can have the other, but you can't have them both. So if you realize somebody is God, you can't have an intimate relationship with that person. You can have a relationship with that person, but not an intimate one. So that's why Krishna backs off on the God business, even though he is. And occasionally, even the cowherd men and the cowherd ladies, they sometimes kind of come to those conclusions. Like Mother Yashoda seeing the entire universe in her son's mouth and thinking, did I just hallucinate? Or what just happened, you know? So sometimes he backs off on that just to, you know, make it seem it's just us chickens here, you know, that, you know, Arjuna, you would do better to surrender to the Supreme, you know. Okay, I am the Supreme, but let's not think about that for right now. Kind of like that, you know. That would be my reply. And of course, it always strikes me when I hear this, because there are a number of places in Bhagavad-gita where Krishna talks about himself in kind of an indirect way. But there are times when he talks about himself in a very direct way, too. So both of those things are found in the Bhagavad-gita. But I think it's partly that whole kind of, yeah, I am, no, I'm not, yeah, I am, no, I'm not, you know, kind of thing that we see with those who are in the mood of intimate relationships with the Supreme. Those who are not in intimate relationships, he doesn't play that game with, because there's no need to. They're already accepting him as a Supreme, and that's a different relationship.
Interesting, because in a few verses he's going to say directly, Supreme surrender to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So he kind of goes back and forth. Here, it kind of also, I think, has to do with the angle philosophically he's approaching things. In some cases, he's describing, you know, his various energies, and then he says, surrender unto me. And other places he's describing, as we follow the thread here, he's talking a lot about the super soul. And so he's saying surrender to the super soul, which he is the super soul, but it's a different aspect. Yeah.
Also, I mean, Mars, do you think it makes sense for Krishna to say surrender unto God, and then later on say that's me? Because as a matter of logic, he's explaining that whoever is in the position of God,
Right.
everything comes from God, including, you know, the souls, the material world, the spiritual world. So therefore, it only makes sense that the soul, as a part and parcel of God, must surrender to God in order for the soul to function normally.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, by the way, that's me.
Right. Yeah, I think all those things there. Yeah.
I'd love to hear you expand on the meaning of the supreme and eternal abode. I'm assuming that's the
Yeah.
state of consciousness.
Yeah, actually, Prabhupada indirectly in the verse here quotes, in the purport here, quotes, I believe it's 9:12, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma. Or 10, 12, and 13, that's what I'm thinking about, 10. So let's go there for a minute. All the way back to 10th chapter, 10, 12, and 13. Arjuna Uvacha Param Brahma Param Dham Pavetram Paramam Bhavan Purusham Shashvatam Dibyam Adidevam Ajam Vibhum Ahustvam Rishya Sarve Devarshir Naradastata Asito Devalo Vyasaha Swayam Chaiva Bhavishi Me. Arjuna said, you are the supreme personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn and the greatest. All the great sages such as Narada, Sita, Devala, and Vyasa confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring it to me. So what this verse is mostly about is this idea that Krishna is the supreme. And Prabhupada uses that as the main theme in the purport of this verse. Now, Param Dham, that's the particular Sanskrit that you were questioning about. Way I would reply to that is there's a number of different ways of conceiving of Krishna. And often in the Vedic literature, we hear about three categories. We hear about Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So Sambandha is understanding the situation you're in, the material world. Abhideya is understanding what to do about that situation. And Prayojana is understanding what will be the result of doing those things which will mitigate your situation here. And there we get like a target. So where are we going? And so where are we going? We're going to the spiritual world. And that is called Param Dham, the highest abode. It's the spiritual world. So Krishna is that spiritual world, and he's what makes it what it is. And so he is, I was kind of looking at how this whole section flows in 18th chapter here towards the end of it. We get this sense of he's talking how we understand our situation. We follow our dharma according to varnashram. And then by performing our activities with the Supreme Lord at the center of those activities, we become purified. We have these various qualities that he discusses. And then eventually we come to, as I said at the very beginning, knock on the door of the abode of God. So this is the idea that if we purify ourselves, a lot of things happen. We get purified. We see things the way that they really are. We become less entangled in the material world. And eventually, we start to approach the abode of the Supreme. That is actually one of the final products of the spiritual journey. We leave this plane of existence, the material world, and we enter into the Supreme Abode. And Krishna is that Supreme Abode. He's the one that creates it. He's the one that makes it what it is. And he's identical with it, yet he resides within it. And it is a place where he has his divine pastimes. So that's how I would relate. Does that kind of answer your question, or it kind of gets in that direction? Any other questions about that angle? And we'll launch into the idea of understanding features of God. Because this verse, 1862, is actually one of the places where we see Krishna being described as the Supreme. Because he's describing the Supreme Lord as situated in everyone's heart, directing the wanderings. So we're hearing about the Supreme. And in the purport, Prabhupada pulls together several kind of odd verses that describe that this is really the real theme of the Vedas. That if you read the Vedas, you don't come away with the idea that Krishna is the Supreme and we have to surrender to him. You miss the point, because people do miss the point. And not just a few people, but probably most of the people who become involved with the Vedas miss the point. Why do they miss the point? Because they don't have the same concept that the Vedas are trying to get across to them. They focus on some other concept of the Vedas. So Prabhupada's just bringing that out That there will be people who say, well, actually the Vedas are about how to do yagas so you can enjoy in the material world. Or people say, no, the Vedas are how to worship various demigods, so demigods will bestow various material benedictions. And other people say, no, that's not what it is. The Vedas are about how to go to the heavenly planets. And others will say, no, that's not what the Vedas are about. The Vedas are about meditating so that you can become one with the universe. And, so there are all these different conceptions of what is it the Vedas are really telling us. But Prabhupada focuses on these verses, and the one he focuses on the most here is, of course, 15:15. Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivishto mata smriti gyaham. Mata smriti gyanam apohanam cha vedas cha sarvaira hameva vedyo vedanta krit veda vedeva chaham. That I'm seated in everyone's heart. From me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So, in that very last sentence, we begin to understand that Krishna is the goal, the source, and the knower of the Vedas, those three things. So, if you get something else out of the Vedas other than Krishna is the goal of them, you miss the point. So that's one of the reasons why Prabhupada is saying that. He pulls this obscure verse out of the Rig Veda. How often do you hear a verse quoted from the Rig Veda by Prabhupada? We almost never hear anything from the Rig Veda. But this Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Param Sada is this kind of strange verse that I looked in the database and I couldn't find it at all. It completely stayed there. I had to go to my super secret place where you can find even strange verses that that generally you never find out about. I don't know whatever happened to this book, but this was a book that a devotee put together, I think about 30 years ago or something like that, a long time ago. It's called Vaishnava Verse Book by...
It's a great book.
Yeah. If you get any weird verses and you can't find them anywhere, they're in here. So this one's on 352. Let me see if I can find it, Otherwise, you can't even find it in the database. Yeah, here it is. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Pradam Sada Pasyante Suryo Divivya Chakshur Atatam Tad Viprasho Vipanayo Jagrivamshaha Samindate Vishnuyata Param Padam. And they've got three translations for it here. Just as the sun rays in the sky are extended to the mundane vision, so in the same way the wise and learned devotees always seek the supreme abode of Lord Vishnu. Because those highly praiseworthy and spiritually awake brahmanas are able to see the spiritual world, they are also able to reveal that supreme abode of Lord Vishnu. So here we have that, Param Dham again, that same concept. So just as the sun's rays go everywhere, so Lord Krishna's Dham, or his abode, is kind of the light that lights up everything. But only a few people know how to actually get there. So that's one thing. Here's another translation. The lotus feet of Lord Vishnu are the supreme objective of all the demigods. These lotus feet of the Lord are as enlightening as the sun in the sky. Here's the third translation. The personality of Godhead Vishnu and his supreme, who is the absolute truth, whose lotus feet the demigods are always eager to see. Like the sun god, he pervades everything with the rays of his energy. He appears impersonal to imperfect eyes. So this is that verse, Rig Veda 1.22.20. Om Tat Vishnu Paramam Purnam Sada. So again, we see that those who really know the Vedas understand that the real business of the Vedas is to help us to understand Krishna, serve him, and re-enter his abode. So that's really what we're talking about, is to re-enter the abode of the Supreme and to leave this world behind. But nobody's going to force you to go there. You have to want to go there. And if you're not really ready to try to live a life of always focusing on God, on Krishna, then you wouldn't be happy there anyway. And that's what spiritual life is about. It's what I call spiritual rehab. So we all start to engage in spiritual rehab. And by hearing about Krishna, associating with devotees, chanting, engaging in activities of book distribution, and helping other people understand the process of spiritual life. By engaging these, we are gradually finding ourselves purified of these strange fantasies that we've picked up lifetime after lifetime, traveling through the material world, doing our God project. So here in 18.62, we are hearing that Krishna is the Supreme, and that his abode is the place we want to go. And we're hearing that that is really the message of the Vedas. And if we look throughout the world, we'll discover that there are many, many theories or conceptions of God, all the way from very atheistic types of conceptions to God to having a personal conception of God. And these are described in the 7th and 9th chapter of Bhagavad-gita. We hear, Mahatmana stunam parta daivam prakritim ashritata. So we have, what is that verse? That's 9:13. Let me find that one. Whoop, 2 minutes. Mahatmanas mam parta daivam prakritim ashrita bhajanti ananya manaso gyata bhutatam avyayam. O son of Pritha, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. And the next verse says, Satatam kirtiyanto mam yatantas chadridha brataha namasyantas tamam bhaktya nityayukta pasate. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me in devotion. So that's the highest class. Those who are great souls. Here they're called Mahatmas. And they understand Krishna's a person. They understand what he looks like. They understand what he wants. And they're trying to enter his abode, as we've been talking about. They're taking the full process. Now, below them, we have a group that are called the Sukritinas. And they are mentioned in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where we hear that, there are 4 pious men that surrender to Krishna. And they are the Arta, the Artarti, the Jigyasur, and the Jnani. So the one who's in distress, the one who's in need of financial assistance, the one who is inquisitive, and the one who is actual spiritual searcher. So these are 4 kinds of pious men. It means that they haven't quite gotten to that stage of being a Mahatma yet. Why? Because still there is an element of how I can become materially gratified by the process. The one who is in distress, he wants to get out of distress. That's his main objective. And God is a tool to help him get out of distress. the one who wants financial assistance, that person also wants God as a tool to help them to go from being, in poverty where they don't want to be to some affluence. Then you have those who are curious, but they really are not ready to try to serve God. They just think it's an interesting concept. And then we have the jnani, who is one who is actually speculating about what God might be like. So these are called sukritinas. They haven't finally understood the real bottom line, but they're on the way because they accept God and they are kind of heading in that direction. Now, below them, we have three other categories, which are described back again in the 9th chapter, 9.15, where we have something called the, what is it called now? The Ekat Vena, the Pritak Vena Bahuda, and the Vishvatamuk. So that's 9.15. Ekat Vena, that's the one who is the monist, the one who thinks God and everything is one. Then we have the Pritak Vena Bahuda, the one who worships many gods. And then we have finally the Vishvatamuk, the one who sees the universe as God. And these are far more common for us. We see this kind of thing far more often. That, especially in the modern day, a lot of people have attraction to the God who is formless, the God who is a metaphor, the God who is the universe, the God who is an intelligence behind all things. A lot of people are attracted to this kind of thing. Of course, God is these things, but as we actually understand Him, He is more than any one of these conceptions. There's more to it than any one of these conceptions. So if we actually look at history, probably Baruch Spinoza was one of the first modern-day Vishvatamukas. He was the one who said, I don't believe in God as a person. I believe in God as this intelligence or something like that. And he was not appreciated in his time. But shortly later on, he was. And many of the people who became important scientific figures and philosophical figures in our modern world did have the same conception. As a matter of fact, Isaac Newton had that same conception. Benjamin Franklin seemed to have that same conception. And even, Albert Einstein directly said it, that I believe in the God of Baruch Spinoza. That Baruch Spinoza's God was pantheism, basically, that the universe is God. And it's true, but that's not the whole picture. God is more than that. He's also person. He's not just the universe, he's beyond the universe. And then you have the typical Mayavadi conception that it's all one. And that's also true. But again, it's not the whole story. It is true that everything is one, but that doesn't mean God is not a person also. And as a person, one can develop a relationship with Him. One can merge into the oneness of God, but it's never recommended because we lose our individuality and there's no possibility of relationship if we merge with the Supreme. And that's why we don't recommend it. And yet these are conceptions of God. Of course, in our modern world, oftentimes we hear people make statements like, oh, they're worshiping a different God. Oftentimes, these are just, the statements of people who've never really thought about anything and just are sold to some dogma that they don't themselves understand. But the Supreme, the one that's the source of everything, you can call Him Jehovah, Yahweh, Allah, Krishna, whatever you like. It's the same being. And it's certainly true that one can have a better or more simplistic understanding of this being. That's true. But it is the same being. However, there are demigods, and there are people who worship those demigods. And this is where we get the, Pritak Vena Bahudak. And this is something that's been on this planet for a long time, not just in India, but in many places in our world, people worship various different gods, ones that they hope will help them in their everyday life. So we have in India, people commonly worship Durga Devi, and they commonly worship Kubera and others because they hope for wealth. They hope for some kind of reciprocation, that their life will become more prosperous as a result. And generally speaking, if one does that, one's life will become more prosperous. But again, we don't recommend that. It can be, but why not cut out the middleman and go right to the source? If you're going to worship someone to become wealthy, worship God. And then you're going out of the, Pritak Vena Bahuda category up into the, Sukritina category we talked about a minute ago, where you have those who approach God for some material benediction or to get out of distress. Oh, at any rate, we can see that these are various conceptions of God. And depending on where a person is on their spiritual journey, is what conception of God they've arrived at. And when one understands God as a person, one understands God has relationships, one understands one wants to go to that Param Dhamma, that supreme abode, then one is on the highest level. And we engage in devotional service. We understand some may not want to do that. We understand some may not understand that, but that's all right. Eventually, everyone will come to that point. Maybe some lifetimes down the road, but eventually everyone will come to that point. So these other conceptions of God are there, and they are real conceptions, but they're not complete conceptions. They don't offer us the complete picture of what God is. The idea of worshiping many demigods, the idea of merging with God, the idea of doing business with God, the idea of thinking the universe is God. All these are also conceptions of God, but they are incomplete conceptions of God. Okay, so I'll stop there and questions, yeah.
My understanding has been that the key is sort of embracing the paradox of Krishna is the oneness, but also we are individual aspects of him, and then also it's personal and yet impersonal at the same time.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that's called a Chintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Historically, even in the Vaishnava tradition, there were big wars about that. But Lord Chaitanya synthesized it by his Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. And what that means is Achintya is inconceivable, Bheda means different, and Abheda means not different. So it's one of those things that many times people have trouble wrapping their heads around, that something can be simultaneously, inconceivably one and different. But actually, once you accept it, there's not much, it kind of makes everything make sense, because it isn't just Krishna that's simultaneously one and different. There's a lot of other things that are simultaneously one and different. And of course, in Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, Vedanti tat tatvad vedhas tatvam yajganam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabjate, that this non-dual substance is recognized by the sages in three distinct aspects, as the Brahman, the Paramatma, and the Bhagavan. So the Brahman is the all-pervading feature. We accept it exists. It certainly is. Otherwise, what are we made of? We have to be made of the essence of God. In that case, we certainly are one with God. However, there is the Paramatma, which is the Lord in the heart, which is separate from us, and yet within our heart. And then we have the Lord as Bhagavan, the person who actually we can have a relationship with. And all those three simultaneously exist, even though it may be hard to explain exactly how they exist. Yeah. Merlin.
So you made the point that in the lower stages of the path to God, one prays for relief from distress.
Right.
Sometimes we get into a really difficult situation. Are we not to pray to God for relief?
No, you can. You can. It's not considered the highest devotion, but you certainly can. And it's a lot better than a lot of other options. So it depends on how purified we are. You know, that's generally how people start their journey to God, through these four kinds of pious sukratinas, which are described in the 7th chapter. That someone who is in distress, someone who is in need of wealth, someone who is inquisitive, or someone who's a seeker, these people begin to turn towards God because they have no commitment to atheism. And although they're not sure exactly what God is, they're heading in the right direction. And if you do business with God long enough, eventually you recognize you don't have to do business with Him. You'll be purified of that. That's the whole thing. But the quicker you come to that stage, the better off you are.
But so I have the knowledge to know that it's a lower platform to go to pray to God for relief from distress.
Right.
Would that, but if I'm really stuck in a situation, I may have some how do you say, dual feelings about turning
right.
to God. But what am I going to do?
Right. That's Prahlad never asked for Nrsingadev to save him, even though Nrsingadev did save him, because God already knows everything. It's not like we have. It's like sometimes people have this idea that God's, doing some working away on His computer, and unless they, prompt Him with a prayer, maybe He won't notice the fact that a dog is biting them or something like that. But it really isn't like that. That whatever is happening to us is actually happening to us for a purpose, and there is never any problem with trying to take simple measures to mitigate issues that are happening to us. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody commonly does that. Even people who are great devotees, they, take an umbrella when they go outside. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, what we do notice occasionally is those special Krishna things that just don't never go away. No matter what you do, those kind of special things which are actually there as tools to push us to a different quantum level. They are not normal problems that we have. And those are the ones we usually want help with. And of course, we can ask Krishna for help in a kind of not give him a prescription of what it is that we actually want him to do. I need you. What was it? There's this, there's some story I heard about some Jewish prayer that one time that there was some rabbis, and this king was really, really against the Jewish people. And it created all this kind of thing. And, they were praying to God that he would die. And so they said, well, can't you actually see that he's just a person like you, and this and that and the other? So they said, all right. So they prayed that he would become a lover of God, but at a distant place. So it's kind of like that, So, at any rate, we can see how this kind of thing works. That there's nothing wrong with trying to go to God for relieving our distress or our difficulties, and that's not a non-spiritual sentiment. But generally, we understand deeper that Krishna already knows what's happening, and he already knows what to do about it. All we're asking for is, help me deal with it, help me understand what I'm supposed to learn. I think that's the better prayer, you know. Hey, what am I supposed to learn from this thing, you know, that's happening to me? And then we begin to get on the path to know that things aren't happening at us as part of some kind of, accidental situation. So that's kind of a deeper view. Yeah.
Is the idea behind these categories sort of a matter of primary motivation? So if you're coming to Krishna, like specifically because you want to get out of financial distress, that's very different than the top category of like genuinely.
Right.
I think maybe that might help.
Well, people have different motivations, and it depends on how much sunk we are in materialism. To come to Krishna, you have to understand two things. And this is where the religions of the world they cut different paths through this jungle. You know, the two things you have to understand is that God exists and He's a person. And the other thing you have to understand is that you have to give up sense gratification. If you're not willing to give up sense gratification, any lip service you give to serving God is pretty weak-kneed, you know. So a lot of our modern religions, they do well on the first part, you know, of understanding God and trying to. And there are a few religions that actually think of Him as a person, you know. Of course, nowadays that's starting to become rarer and rarer, you know. But when it comes to recognizing that God isn't a tool to give us what we want, that's where most modern religion starts to fall in its face, because people don't understand that distinction at all. If I were a rich man, you know, we've all heard that song, you know, that, why can't I just be a rich man? and it's not, you know, everyone tends to have this conception, why can't I just be more well off financially? We think that the reason is that if we had just a little bit more money, we would certainly use it for our spiritual purposes and so on and so forth. We would do so much good work with it, but we would also likely get entangled in it. So everything is done in a very specific way for very specific reasons. But unless we're really looking at it from that angle, it's easy to miss. So some people they've come to the understanding that God exists and that somehow I need to serve God. A lot of religions have got that, but they're kind of not doing well on the other platform of recognizing that sense gratification is not really your friend and that God is not a tool to get it. You know, they haven't thought that out. There are the other people that are the opposite way, who don't believe in God, but they understand sense gratification is a waste of time. You know, like Buddhists and various people who are very austere in their lives. They don't know anything about God, but they know that sense gratification will never work. And so they're the other way on the thing. But you need both of them. You need to know that God is a person, and the whole business is to try to develop a loving relationship with Him. And that eventually, yes, we do have to give up our best cherished sense gratification. And in the long run, we won't die. We won't bleed to death. They won't have to call the paramedics. But it may take us a while to finally let go of it, you know, as we become purified by the process of devotional service. So people are at different stages on these things, depending on what they've been able to let go of and what they haven't been able to let go of yet, you know. So this is the process. And that's why we have these different conceptions of God. And if you really need God to be your order supplier, then there are religions who let you do that, you know, and they don't challenge you with it. And you'd probably be pretty comfortable there, you know. But if you want to go a little bit deeper than that, then you kind of start to recognize that there's another level to it. And then you can see how any of the religions would actually work better with that as the major premise. And there are people who figure it out in every religion. But the nice thing about the Vedas is if you study the Vaishnava system, it'll be pushed right up front. You won't have to dig it out of something in the very, very backwoods of the religious understanding.
It's interesting in Prabhupada's life because he would say that I wanted to make money to serve God.
Right,
And then Krishna took it all away.
right,
And he wound up serving God in a much greater way.
right, right. So that actually happened to Prabhupada.
We should probably do one more question.
Okay. What was your question?
Oh, I was just going to make a comment. I don't remember where I heard this story. Maybe I read it in a devotee's memoir. But when Srila Prabhupada was about to leave this life and devotees came to him in distress,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how do we don't want you to leave, but we know this is God's will, this is Krishna's will, and we pray, what do we do, because this is causing us mental disturbance. And Srila Prabhupada offered up the concept of petitioning God.
Right.
So I think it aligns well with what you're talking about, in that, you know, petitioning God is praying, you know, you're in distress, you don't really know how to get through this turmoil, but you pray in the sense of, if it be your will,
Mm-hmm.
please let this happen. If it be your will, please let me find money to pay rent. If it be your will,
Right.
help me find
Or
money.
let me figure out what I have to do instead.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you heard that story? Or are you?
Yeah, I've heard that, sir.
Okay.
In fact, I remember it very clearly when the temple presidents were making those announcements on the microphone in the morning that, you know, Prabhupada said we could petition Krishna, that my dear Krishna, if you so desire, let Prabhupada stay. Of course, devotees did it. For a while it worked, and after a while it didn't work anymore. Because we were just forestalling the inevitable, and I think everybody subconsciously knew it, but nobody wanted to accept it, you know. And so anyway,
That's slightly different.
What's that?
That's also slightly different than, you know, if it's your will, Srila Prabhupada, please keep the greatest devotee in the world here to help, not just help me, but help the world.
Mm.
That's slightly different.
right, than a personal prayer.
But it's related.
Right.
nonetheless.
So these are, you know, you can't tell Krishna how to do his business, but you can pray, and you can always understand that whatever you see, Krishna sees more. And your praying is kind of an open prayer to whatever this is that I'm having to go through. Help me to figure out how to get through it. And that certainly is not about, you're not really trying to give Krishna a specific outcome that he's supposed to. That's why people oftentimes get disturbed with various prayers because, you know, please let Johnny get better, or let Susie pass her exam at school, or let my husband come back from the military, and it doesn't happen, and they think, you know, I'm becoming an atheist. God didn't answer my prayer. But it's obvious that God is not our order carrier, and he sees things on a greater scale than we do, and we're asking for some kind of specific, tailor-made benediction from him, when we should really be trying to understand what he's trying to tell us with the whole arrangement of things. Nobody dies, everybody goes on forever in one lifetime or another, and eventually we all make it back to the Supreme Lord. But usually we don't see things in that perspective. We see them in a much more narrow perspective. And that's what leads us to making these very tailor-made, you know, customized prayers where we're asking God for something very, very specific that suits us in a specific way. All right, so we're
So now we'll do
Damodara.
Yeah, Damodara Sikha, and then followed by Hare Krishna kirtan.
Okay.